be legitimate. Here's the John Rylands papyrus. This is P162. There's a bunch of other ones in the John Rylands library, which is also in England. By the way, England has a lot of great archaeological discoveries, and some other countries complain that they took all these things because they had an empire, they investigated all these things. But a lot of, if you want to see a lot of great historical material, you go to British Museum and different places in England because they collected a lot of it. So anyway, this is in John Rylands library, and this papyrus is dated about 90 AD. So this piece of a papyrus has part of the book of John, you know, a couple of verses on the front and the back, and you can tell that it is from the book of John. This document that this came from would have been in circulation when John was still alive. Just think about that. This would have been circulating when he was still probably alive. That is incredible. Now, as if that's, there's a bunch of other New Testament manuscripts I'm just going to go through. So within 5 years of his death, there's an early creed that 1 Corinthians 15 quotes about him rising from the dead and being the Messiah. So that's not something that's added later. We know it's very, very early. It's probably within 5 years, the basics of the Christian faith. And so when you hear stuff on the Discovery Channel, you know, well, people kind of thought this and it evolved over time, not possible. If you just take the normal historical methods. And then the John Rylands papyrus we talked about, there's 104 leaves actually of John, and that's within those early years, 90 to 150 AD. And then the New Testament's translated into the Syrian language. You got the Bodmer papyrus, that's within maybe 100 years. Then you've got, this just means Tatian. He wrote in Assyrian, but he took the 4 Gospels and he made a harmony of it, you know, put them together. So he's already making, putting all the 4 Gospels together. So you think the 4 Gospels existed before 200? If he's already putting them together? Of course. Then you've got the Codex Vaticanus, there's the Codex Alexandrinus, and there's more. So basically, now as if that isn't enough, there's translations into other languages you can see very early on, and everything that I'm listing is better than any other document from the classical world. Notice I'm not going beyond even 500 AD. Everything else is completely blown away by any of this. So it's so much so that the principal librarian of the British Museum, which I mentioned in England, in London, and the reason I picked the British Museum is because it's probably got the best collection of documents and archaeological artifacts than any museum on the planet. And this guy, for years and years, highly respected, rose to the top, was the principal librarian of the entire museum. So he knows all these documents and what's available from all kinds of different texts. So that's his life. And he says, in no other case is the interval between the time of the composition of the book and the date of the earliest existing documents so short as that in the New Testament. And the books of the New Testament clearly says were written in the latter part of the 1st century, despite what people who might have religious degrees at Harvard saying, the guy who sees all the documents and looks at them says, if you look at it from a historical perspective, that can't be true. So even if we didn't have any of these documents, by the way, almost half of the New Testament could have been reproduced from early bishop quotes. So you got all these writings of these early church fathers and believers and bishops writing about different things, and they're quoting scriptures, they're talking about it. So from their quotes of scripture, we could reconstruct half the Bible anyway. So even if you didn't have any of these documents, you've got people quoting it. So as if that isn't enough, how about that? It's already blowing everything else away, but we have number of manuscripts, years between date written, earliest copy, external evidence, and that's what we're going to do now. Now, no external textual evidence. Remember, we say, somebody saying, hey, I know this person. he wrote this book demonstrating the validity of authorship. No other external evidence exists for any of the documents in the classical world. There's nobody saying, hey, I know Josephus. Yeah, he really did live in Rome. He was writing a history of the Jews. Yep, can testify to that. Nothing has external evidence. But nobody doubts it. But with the New Testament, guess what? And I won't go through all this, but different people are saying, hey, I know Clement, he was appointed by Peter, and these guys wrote the books. Irenaeus says Clement heard the apostles personally and knew them, so here's external evidence. Polycarp of Smyrna, Bishop of Smyrna, 125 AD, he says, guess what? I know John. I was his disciple. I was John's actual disciple who knew Jesus, who hung out with Jesus. And he told me Mark, Luke, Matthew, and John wrote their books. Can you have anything better than that, right? If that isn't enough, Clement of Rome was a disciple of the apostles, and he doesn't actually literally say, hey, these guys wrote the books, but he's quoting from them as if they're authoritative, which is almost just as good, quoting from Mark, Matthew, Luke, Acts, 1 Corinthians, Titus, Hebrews, 2 Peter. So this is pretty good stuff. So you got tons of external, you've got the best documents from the ancient world and all the tests. Are you going to believe them? And what do they say? So we might not get to all this, but you guys already know, I think you all do know what they say. You look at clearly what they say. But so if you're going to throw out the New Testament documents, if you're going to distrust their accuracy and reliability, then, and you're going to be consistent, you have to throw out your entire knowledge of the classical world. You're going to have to say, okay, SUNY, what are you doing? You better shut down all these departments. Okay, Harvard, shut it all down. You don't know anything about that. Because if you're going to throw this out, you better throw that out first. Because this is far better than that, far more reliable. So the internal evidence, we'll just go through a little briefly, and I'm going to stop because we're almost out of time. But the writers categorically state the nature of what they're writing. They're not like an allegory, Winnie the Pooh. That's not what they're talking about. Very clearly they're saying, I'm writing something that happened, a historical account, and I was there. So for example, 2 Peter says, for we did not follow cleverly devised stories when he told you about the coming of our Lord Jesus, but we were eyewitnesses to his majesty. By the way, those other documents, those people generally were not eyewitnesses. Josephus lived in Rome. He was writing about a history of the Jews, but he wasn't there at almost all the history he was writing. And if he talks about something that happened, he's in Rome, and way over here is Jerusalem, and he's talking about stuff that happened at Jerusalem. He's in Rome. He's just writing about stuff he hears about. These guys are saying, we were eyewitnesses. So remember, the benefit of the doubt goes to the person writing the document, unless you can prove otherwise. So there's just a few texts. I'm not going to go through all of them, but well, let me see what's happening here. Okay, I don't have my... So what did they say? Jesus claimed he would rise. I'm not going to go over this in detail, but clearly he says, this is what I'm going to do. These eyewitnesses hear him. There's a whole bunch of other texts. I don't think you guys need this, so I'm going to go through it quickly. Jesus was dead on Good Friday. The testimony of John, who's standing there, says, I'm observing, he's dead. The soldier puts the spear in, out comes water and blood. By the way, there's a medical article about that. I won't go into that. The Journal of American Medical Society talking about how the crucifixion was effective. They knew how to kill people, and they were definitely dead. And the soldiers knew they were dead. And even John is reporting his observation, blood and water comes out. Now, he doesn't necessarily know. He's not describing what that means, but he observes it. But that's important because if blood and water comes out, that means the sword pierced the pericardial sac and the heart. So the fluid around the sac is coming out watery, looking clear, and the blood is coming out looking bloody. There's no way he was alive. So then he's observed after he's dead. I'm not going to go through these, but basically he shows them the handprints in his hands. He has fish with them. By the way, people saying he's a ghost, actually there's no, the dean of the law school was an expert in the occult. He had a bunch of books and researched everything. He had whole shelves and shelves of them. And he said, I can tell you for sure there's nobody ever observed a ghost eating fish. And apparently they don't like that kind of cuisine with because they don't have tummies, maybe. But Jesus is there. He's eating fish. Pretty good evidence. If I was having a meal with Debbie and she's sharing some fish with me, I would say, "You're saying she's a ghost?" No, she was eating some fish with me. I'm pretty sure she wasn't. So anyway, there's lots of great evidence. There's Thomas wanting to observe him. There he is cooking some fish for the disciples there. And the account of it by John again, who was there. And many people observed for 40 days. King Agrippa, there's 500 people still alive, Paul says. So anyway, there's a lot of great evidence. I'm not going to go into all of that. So anyway, here I'm going to blow through this because we don't have time, but we can do more of this later if we want to. Let's see. So, the resurrection is true beyond any reasonable doubt. It's a very provable case. There's no reasonable way to doubt it. It's validated outside the Bible. I didn't show you that, but the New Testament document is more reliable than anything else in the classical world. Whoops. And why isn't it working? There it is. The testimony, it's eyewitness. It clearly observes Jesus dead and then alive. And I'm not going to go into that last one. Okay.
Actually, for the first one, because you are going to have a lot of people that look at us and say, you're taking this from the Bible. Mm-hmm. Show me proof outside that Jesus came back from the dead. So if you could just very briefly go over the external proof, that way we could have, in case today we have somebody.
Here's what I usually do with that. Yeah. I can say, well, I can show you some external proof, but they have to understand what the Bible is, and we can go into that a little bit more, because that's like saying, actually the 66 books of the Bible, the 29 in the New Testament, the reason they're in the New Testament, it's not one book, they're 29 different documents, right? Written by different people who were there, or new people who were there. They're in the Bible because they come from either eyewitnesses who were there or people who are very close associates and carefully recording and writing down what the eyewitnesses told them. So what's excluded from the New Testament is all hearsay and people who weren't there, speculating about it, and so the 29 documents are the golden standard stuff. So that would be like somebody saying, look, I just listened to all the eyewitnesses. There's about 10 of them. They all were there. They saw it. They're all valid testimony. You can't, shoot any holes in them. Cross-examine and all this and that. But I still don't believe the guy did it. Can you show me somebody who wasn't there to talk about that? Can we go interview a CNN reporter and see what he thinks? Or let's go to China and talk to some guy in China who's thousands of miles away. Can I get somebody who wasn't there? I don't like these. I
mean, like with the Martyr of the Saints, where they just went into the Colosseums and they're being lit by torches by Rome. Would that be a external evidence showing that no possible sane person would be willing to die like that if they didn't trust?
I wouldn't. The reason I wouldn't go there is because one could argue that people believe something and they fly planes into buildings. They really sincerely believe it, but they're believing something that they were told, something they believe. Oh yeah, I think Muhammad really was a prophet, and they believe something very sincerely. They can do things. They can even lay down their lives. But that's a different matter than somebody who says, I was actually there. And so to exclude, well, I want something outside the Bible. It's like saying, well, you have all these eyewitnesses, wow, it's good, but give me some non-eyewitnesses. Let's find somebody somewhere else who wasn't at the scene. Let's go ask, whoever in China about it. It's not really worth as much. And even if the person in China says, well, yeah, this happened, it's not really worth, you want to have the eyewitnesses. And that's what somebody's trying to do, is say, well, let's forget about all, the reason they're in the Bible is because they're eyewitnesses. It's just a collection of all the people who are the best source of the material. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that's how I answer that question. I say, this isn't really magical, the Bible. These are the people who were there, and that's why their testimony is trustworthy. And why are we going to ask for somebody that's got hearsay when you've got the people who are there? It doesn't make any sense. But there are things that validate the Bible outside it. We can talk more about that another time. All right? I'm sorry. But next week, now if you want, I can switch it up. We can do Bible and Science next week, and we can do Problem of Evil after that. Would you like to do that?
Yes, because I can't be here that week. I'm selfish because I'm going to miss the third week.
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
So you want to do Bible and Science next week?
Yeah, that'd be
Okay,
great.
so I'll do Bible and Science next week, and then I'll do Problem of Evil. Unless you guys don't really care about the Problem of Evil, then you can tell me.
No, that's an important
That's
one.
another one.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
All
a good
right.
one.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you.